bringing us together as cities as much as possible, because as much as we like to say that we learn from each other, we also compete with each other. And there's always a spirit of competition, which I think boosts the achievement at the local level. So I'm hopeful that you do that.
Well, on that note, somebody asked me in the earlier session why I didn't go to Davos. Well, the reason I didn't go to Davos this year is that it was at the same time as the U.S. Conference of Mayors was meeting in Washington. And so we had all of our nation's mayors in D.C. meeting with the administration, talking about how to align our agendas. And one thing which I mentioned to Julia earlier, which I think is a strength of the Obama administration, is that I did a panel and I had Arnie Duncan, who obviously is superintendent of education, started as a superintendent here in Chicago. Tom Perez, our labor secretary, used to run the labor department for the state of Maryland and was a city councilman in Maryland as well. We had Anthony Fox, the Secretary of Transportation, former mayor himself. And then bringing together people who actually worked on the ground where the rubber meets the road. We have 3 former governors as cabinet members. It's not an accident that the president looked outside of Washington to assemble his cabinet. He wanted to have people who had experience on the ground making change happen. And so I think having that relationship with the U.S. Conference of Mayors is so important. The Governors Association will be in town in another week or so, and we work with them collaboratively. And I think what you'll find is as though, even though there is healthy competition, there are many initiatives that we can share together. And so, for example, there are cities across the country that are now focusing on making sure we have early childhood education for all. So San Antonio, for example, Mayor Castro down there has made it a priority. DC, my new home away from home, has made it a priority as well to make sure all of our children, all the children in their systems have that opportunity for high quality, affordable early childhood education. We were unsuccessful in getting legislation through for background checks for guns, and so cities and states all across the country are taking action. The President signed 23 different executive orders that will make it easier for the federal government to help work with cities across the country to reduce crime. We're working on manufacturing. We're talking about how important it is to have that advanced manufacturing. And the President was just in North Carolina a couple of weeks ago launching a new manufacturing hub where 18 businesses and 7 universities have come together to try to figure out how to unleash that innovation that will lead to the advanced manufacturing and also train the workforce so it's prepared for those jobs in the future. So all across the country, magic is happening just since the President's State of the Union when he said he was going to raise the minimum wage for employees who work for federal contractors. You've got the governor of Connecticut and the mayor of St. Louis announcing that they're going to change their minimum wage. And so we can have action happen all across the country. It doesn't all require congressional legislation, but we hope that by demonstrating at the ground that you can take action, that maybe it'll create a little pressure in Washington for some momentum.
So I think we can be catalysts for momentum. We have people in this room who have been very focused on a living wage, a fair wage, the kind of wage that drives an economy. But let's move from early childhood to actually college education. I mean, it's true that college education now is the basic requirement for today's workforce. So what do you think are the basket of what's in the basket of policies and programs that you believe would help ensure greater college completion? And then once again, what can we do?
Well, as I mentioned, the initiative that we launched out focusing on particularly disadvantaged young people, getting them excited about college. And there are no 2 better ambassadors than the President and the First Lady to talk about this. And the First Lady was so powerful when she said, look, growing up at Whitney Young, it never occurred to her to go to Princeton. She never even heard about Princeton. The only reason she heard about it is her brother was there on a basketball scholarship. Well, you can't take the chance of something like that happening. So it's our collective responsibility to start very young to encourage young people to think and aspire to college and to think about what they would do after college. I love to always tell the story about a good friend of mine, Ursula Burns, who's CEO of Xerox. And she grew up poor, but she had an aptitude for engineering. And someone said to her, why don't you just try an internship at Xerox? And so she started out, as a summer intern at Xerox and then went on to now be the CEO of the company. But if she hadn't had that initial work experience, then she would probably never have materialized into the incredible business leader that she is today. Last summer, we worked with many of you probably in this room and mayors across the country to improve summer job experiences for young people so that they can see what's at the other end of that education. You can't just say go and get an education. You have to tie it to reality and something that they can aspire to and actually achieve. And mentorship is important. These enrichment programs, I know the University of Chicago has a terrific program to get people on campus so they see what the experience is like, and then follow them after that and provide a support network for them when they're in school. All of that leads to a more productive workforce and understanding that it's in our collective responsibility, our collective self-interest, that all of our young children succeed. It should not depend on the zip code in which you were born. And what we are finding is that there are growing disparities in terms of equality. And if you are born poor, the chances of you moving up that ladder to success are disproportionately low. And we need to close that gap. And I think there's enormous potential to do that, working collaboratively.
So make sure that you feed your questions over to Lindsay there, who's collecting, so we have an array of questions for Valerie to respond to. So you mentioned just a moment ago manufacturing, advanced manufacturing is really one of the key strategies for World Business Chicago Plan for Economic Growth and Jobs. You talked a little bit about making sure people were ready for the jobs that are part of advanced manufacturing, but talk a little bit about what kind of training you're talking about. I mean, with the mechanization of manufacturing, what kind of jobs are there and who's going to be able to take advantage of them?
Well, throughout, we were talking about this earlier too, throughout history, we've always had this burst of innovation that leads to greater efficiency, and you have to retool. And if you walk around a manufacturing plant today, it looks very different than a manufacturing plant of 20 years ago looked. The level of skills that you need to operate the equipment are much more sophisticated than the manual labor we did before we had the equipment that we have today. And so what we have to do is to work very closely with the private sector to realign all of our educational tools to the demand of the marketplace. And that's why these consortiums are so important, where you have universities, it can be laboratories for innovation, working hand in glove with the private sector, who are actually creating the innovations. And the entrepreneurial spirit that is really the bedrock of our country can be unleashed if we all come together. And I know that throughout the city of Chicago, we have always had a strong manufacturing base. It started to erode, and then as a result of investments in infrastructure and education and making it a priority, we're seeing that manufacturing is coming back. Just to give a little context, over the last 5 years, we've had over 500,000 manufacturing jobs in the country, over 8.5 million jobs. And so we are on the right track in terms of job creation. We just need to make sure that the workforce has the skills to compete and participate in those jobs. And all too often, you will find pockets in the country where you have high unemployment rate, and then you'll find other pockets in the country where they're paying finder's fees to find somebody with the skills needed to fill a job. We have to get rid of that disconnect and realign the workforce with the skills they need for the jobs for tomorrow. And it's doable because there are great examples of where that's happening